The sound of the helicopter landing on the rooftop of his $40 million penthouse was just another morning soundtrack in Adrian Blackwood's life. At 32, he had built an empire that made kings look like beggars, luxury hotels scattered across 3 continents, a fleet of yachts that rivaled small navies, and a bank account that grew faster than his patience for ordinary people. "Mr. Blackwood, your breakfast is served on the terrace," announced Marcus, his British butler, with the military precision Adrian demanded from everyone around him. Adrian adjusted the cuff of his $1,000 Italian shirt and walked to the panoramic balcony that offered a 360-degree view of New York. The city sprawled at his feet like a chessboard where he always made the winning moves. "Meridian Hotel Group stocks rose 12% last night," he said, scrolling through his tablet while savoring the Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee. "And Dubai's occupancy numbers?" 97.8%, sir. The best quarter in history." A satisfied smile crossed Adrian's sculpted face. Everything in his life followed a pattern of calculated perfection. Until the phone rang. Adrian. His father's voice, William Blackwood, cut through the air like an ice-cold blade through the intercom. "Father." Adrian didn't bother hiding his irritation. William rarely called unless it was about business or problems. "I need to see you, now, in my office. I have a meeting with the Japanese investors in an hour. Cancel it." The call died, leaving Adrian staring at the phone with a raised eyebrow. In 32 years, he could count on his fingers the times his father had used that tone, and none of them had ended well. William Blackwood's office occupied the top floor of Blackwood Tower, a monument of glass and steel that dominated downtown Manhattan. Adrian entered without knocking, heir's privilege, and found the 65-year-old patriarch standing before the window, his back tense under the impeccable suit. "Sit down, Adrian." "I prefer to stand. What's so urgent that couldn't wait?" William turned, revealing an expression Adrian hadn't seen in years. Vulnerability masked by iron determination. "The Ashford family is calling in the debt." Adrian frowned. "What debt? We don't owe the Ashfords anything." 15 years ago, when our company nearly collapsed due to the fraudulent stock scandal, James Ashford lent us $500 million. Without that money, we would have lost everything. The world seemed to stop. Adrian vaguely remembered that dark period of his adolescence when newspapers talked about financial ruin, and his mother cried locked in her room. "You never told me about this." There was no need. I thought I had time to resolve it. But James died last week. Adrian felt a chill in his stomach. And now? Now Helena Ashford, his daughter, is taking over the business. And she wants us to honor the original agreement. What agreement? William walked to the desk and picked up a yellowed folder. The loan wasn't just money, Adrian. It was a family union contract. A promise that you would marry James's daughter when you both reached the appropriate age. The silence that followed was deafening. Adrian felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. "This is medieval. It can't be legal." "It's completely legal. And binding." William opened the folder, revealing signed and sealed documents. "You were 17 when I signed this. It was our only way out." Adrian snatched the papers from his father's hands, his eyes racing over clauses that seemed written in another language, though they were in perfectly clear English. Matrimonial union between Adrian Blackwood and Sophia Ashford as collateral guarantee for the loan of $500,000. Ceremony must occur within 30 days of creditor's request. Non-compliance will result in immediate collection of full amount with compound interest. $500 million, Adrian murmured, calculating mentally. With 15 years of interest. $1.8 billion, William completed grimly. Money we don't have liquid without dismantling the empire we built. Adrian collapsed into the leather chair, the weight of the revelation crushing his shoulders. "And if I refuse? Then we lose everything. The company, the properties, the hotels, everything goes back to the creditors. And you know the Ashfords have enough influence to destroy us completely in court." The air ran his hands through his dark hair, trying to process the information. In one morning, his perfect and controlled life had transformed into a contractual nightmare. "What's she like?" he finally asked, with the resignation of a condemned man. William hesitated. "I haven't seen her since she was a child. But James always said she was special." "Special how?" Helena mentioned that Sophia works as a volunteer teacher in underserved communities. Adrian almost laughed. "Volunteer teacher? Father, are you telling me I'm going to marry some idealist who probably wears leather sandals and hugs trees?" "Adrian! No!" He stood abruptly, walking to the window. "This is insane. My entire life planned, my relationships, my freedom, all because of a contract you signed when I was practically a child. It was our only option at the time. And now it's my only option too." Adrian turned, his ice-blue eyes gleaming with cold fury. "When is the wedding?" "Helena said Sophia could be here next week to meet you." "Meet?" Adrian laughed bitterly, as if it were a blind date instead of a business contract. William approached his son. "Adrian, I know this is difficult, but—" "Difficult?" Adrian interrupted. "Father, I built my entire life on control. Every decision, every move, every relationship, all calculated and chosen by me. And now you're telling me that the most important decision of my life was made when I was 17? The patriarch lowered his head. "If there were another way." Adrian remained silent for long minutes, watching the city below. Small people like ants, living their lives without knowing that on the 60th floor of Blackwood Tower, an empire was being negotiated through an arranged marriage. "Very well," he said finally, his voice controlled and cold as always. "But let's make one thing clear. This is a business agreement, nothing more. I'll fulfill the contract, marry this Sophia, and maintain our company. But don't expect me to pretend this is anything beyond what it really is." William nodded, relieved, but still tense. "Helena said Sophia arrives on Wednesday." "Perfect." Adrian adjusted his tie and walked toward the door. "Arrange for her to be taken to the penthouse. We'll resolve this like any other commercial transaction." "Adrian, maybe if you give it a chance." "Father." Adrian stopped at the door without turning around. "This woman is about to become my wife because of a contract. Not for love, not by choice, but by obligation. The only thing I can promise is that I'll be civil. More than that, we'll see." The door closed with a soft click, leaving William alone with the weight of a decision made 15 years ago that was about to change his son's life forever. Back at the penthouse, Adrian served himself a 25-year-old Scotch whiskey, even though it was only noon, and positioned himself before the panoramic window. The city continued its frenzied dance below, indifferent to the fact that one of New York's most powerful men had just discovered that his life wasn't as much his own as he thought. "Marcus," he called. The butler appeared instantly. "Yes, sir?" "Cancel all my appointments for next week, and prepare the main guest room." "Are we expecting visitors?" Adrian took a long sip of the whiskey, feeling the liquid burn his throat. "We're expecting my fiancée." If Marcus was surprised, he didn't show it. Decades of service had taught him that the Blackwood family was full of surprises, not all pleasant. "Very well, sir. Any special preferences for the accommodation?" Adrian considered for a moment. "Prepare everything with the best we have. If I'm going to marry out of obligation, at least I can ensure it's done with style." When he was alone again, Adrian pulled out his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Christina, it's me." "Yes, I know you're in the middle of a photo shoot, but I need to tell you something." The conversation that followed was as civilized as it was painful. Christina Moreau, the French-American model who had been his constant companion for the past 2 years, received the news with the cold elegance of someone who always knew that relationships in Adrian's social circle had expiration dates. "I understand," she said, her French voice laden with masked sadness. Business is business, isn't it, chérie? Christina. No, Adrian, it's fine. I always knew this could happen. Men like you belong to a world where the heart is a luxury few can afford. The call ended, leaving Adrian with the strange sensation that he had lost something important, though he couldn't define exactly what. On Wednesday, his life would change forever. He would meet Sophia Ashford, the woman who would become his wife not by choice, but by necessity. And no matter how much he tried to keep the situation under his characteristic control, Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to discover that some things in life simply couldn't be controlled. The sun began to set behind the skyscrapers, tinting New York's sky with shades of gold and crimson. In the penthouse on the 45th floor, Adrian Blackwood remained motionless before the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, and the weight of an uncertain future on his shoulders. Somewhere in the city, a woman named Sophia Ashford was about to discover that her life would also change forever. And neither of them had any idea that destiny, disguised as a business contract, was about to teach them a lesson that no MBA or life experience had prepared them to learn, but that would be discovered on Wednesday. Wednesday arrived like a storm wrapped in silk. Adrian had spent 3 days preparing himself mentally for what he imagined would be the most tedious encounter of his life. He'd constructed an entire image in his mind, a plain, bookish woman with thick glasses, probably wearing something beige and shapeless, clutching a worn canvas bag full of inspirational quotes and organic granola bars. He was spectacularly wrong. At exactly 3 p.m., the private elevator chimed, and Adrian looked up from his laptop where he'd been pretending to work while actually staring at the same financial report for the past hour. The elevator doors slid open with a whisper. Time stopped. The woman who stepped into his penthouse wasn't plain. She wasn't bookish. She wasn't wearing beige. Sophia Ashford was breathtaking in the most unexpected way. Not the polished, artificial beauty of the models and socialites Adrian was accustomed to, but something far more dangerous. Natural elegance that seemed to glow from within. Her auburn hair cascaded in soft waves past her shoulders, catching the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She wore a simple navy dress that somehow managed to look both modest and stunning, and her green eyes, God, those eyes, held an intelligence and warmth that hit him like a physical blow. For the first time in his adult life, Adrian Blackwood was speechless. Mr. Blackwood? Her voice was honey over steel, soft but with an underlying strength that suggested she wasn't easily intimidated. I'm Sophia Ashford. Adrian's brain, usually sharp as a razor, seemed to have turned to mush. He stood there, staring like a teenager who'd never seen a beautiful woman before. He cleared his throat, desperately trying to regain his composure. Yes, Adrian. Brilliant conversation, he thought sarcastically. Please, sit. She moved with a grace that seemed effortless, choosing the chair across from his desk rather than the more casual seating area. Everything about her posture suggested she was treating this as seriously as he was, but without the hostility he'd been broadcasting like a radio signal. Thank you for agreeing to see me, she said, folding her hands in her lap. I know this situation is unusual. Unusual. Adrian finally found his voice, though it came out colder than he intended. That's one way to put it. I'd call it archaic, medieval, possibly illegal. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. All accurate descriptions, but, unfortunately, also binding. You seem remarkably calm about being sold off like livestock. The smile disappeared, and for a moment, fire flashed in those green eyes. Sold off? Mr. Blackwood, I'm not a victim here any more than you are. This contract affects both our lives equally. Does it? Because I'm the one who's being forced to give up my freedom, my privacy, Your freedom? She leaned forward slightly, and Adrian caught a whiff of her perfume, something light and floral that was nothing like the heavy, expensive scents he was used to. What about mine? Did you consider that maybe I had plans too? Dreams that didn't involve marrying a stranger who clearly sees me as an inconvenience? Adrian blinked. In all his self-pitying over the past 3 days, he hadn't once considered that she might be just as trapped as he was. The realization was unsettling. What kind of dreams? He heard himself ask, then immediately regretted it. He didn't want to know. Didn't want to think of her as a person with hopes and desires rather than just an obstacle to overcome. Her expression softened slightly. I was planning to open a school for children in underserved communities. I've been saving for years, working multiple jobs, applying for grants. She shrugged, but he caught the hint of sadness in her voice. But apparently I'm more valuable as a wife than a teacher. The words hit him like a slap. Adrian had expected defiance, maybe tears, certainly some gold-digging behavior. He hadn't expected this quiet dignity, this sense that she was sacrificing something important too. Why? He asked abruptly. Why what? Why agree to this? Why not tell your aunt to go to hell and let the chips fall where they may? Sophia was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving to the windows where the city sparkled below them. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Because sometimes doing the right thing means sacrificing what you want for what others need. Meaning Helena isn't just my aunt. She's the only family I have left. And the Ashford estate. It's not just money, mister. Blackwood. It employs 3,000 people across 12 countries. If the company fails because of this debt, all those people lose their jobs, their homes, their futures. Adrian felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest. So you're martyring yourself for strangers. I'm taking responsibility for my family's obligations. Her eyes met his again, steady and clear. Just like you are. The comparison stung because it was accurate. They were both trapped by their father's choices, both sacrificing their freedom for the greater good. But somehow, she made it sound noble while he felt like a petulant child. This is insane, he muttered, more to himself than to her. Yes, it is. She stood up suddenly, smoothing down her dress. But insane doesn't make it any less real. The wedding is scheduled for Saturday. Saturday? Adrian shot to his feet. This Saturday? That's 4 days away? Helena thought a quick ceremony would be best for everyone involved. Less time for second thoughts. I'm having nothing but second thoughts. Then you'll fit right in. She moved toward the elevator, but paused before pressing the button. Mr. Blackwood. Adrian. I know you don't want this. Neither do I. But we're both adults, and we're both smart enough to know when we don't have a choice. Maybe we could at least try to make it bearable. Bearable, he repeated flatly. It's a marriage in name only. I'm not expecting love or even friendship. Just basic human decency. Can you manage that? The question hung in the air between them. Adrian looked at her, really looked, and saw not the burden he'd been dreading, but a woman who was handling an impossible situation with more grace than he'd managed to muster in 3 days. I can try, he said finally. She nodded once, sharp and businesslike. Good. I'll see you Saturday. The elevator doors closed behind her, leaving Adrian alone with the lingering scent of her perfume and the unsettling realization that Sophia Ashford was nothing like what he'd expected. And that terrified him more than any business deal ever had. He walked to the window where she'd been looking moments before, trying to see the city through her eyes. Somewhere down there, 3,000 people were going about their lives, unaware that their futures depended on a marriage between two strangers. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Shall I begin wedding preparations, sir? Adrian stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. Yes. And Marcus? Make it perfect. Of course, sir. Any particular preferences? Adrian thought about green eyes and auburn hair, about quiet dignity and unexpected strength, about a woman who was sacrificing her dreams for people she'd never met. Something elegant, he typed, but not cold. Something warm. If Marcus found the request strange, he didn't show it in his reply. Understood, sir. Saturday was 4 days away. 4 days to prepare for a life he'd never wanted with a woman who was nothing like he'd imagined. Adrian had built his fortune on calculated risks and careful planning, but this felt like stepping off a cliff into complete darkness. The only question was whether he'd fly or fall. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October sunshine that made even cynics believe in new beginnings. Adrian stood in his walk-in closet, staring at 3 identical black tuxedos as if they held the secrets to the universe. "The Armani, sir?" Marcus suggested, appearing with his usual impeccable timing. "Does it matter?" Adrian's voice carried the hollow tone of a man walking to his execution. "It's not like this is a real wedding." Marcus paused in his precise movements, a rare crack in his professional demeanor. "If I may, sir, all weddings are real. It's the marriages that vary." Before Adrian could decode that particular piece of butler wisdom, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Thank you for the flowers. They're beautiful." Adrian frowned. "Marcus, what flowers?" "The white roses and baby's breath I sent to Miss Ashford's hotel this morning, per your instructions." "I never gave you any such instructions." Marcus's smile was barely perceptible. "My apologies, sir. I must have misunderstood your request for something warm." Adrian found himself fighting back an unexpected smile. His butler was playing matchmaker. "And what exactly did the card say?" "Today we begin." I thought it appropriate. 2 hours later, Adrian stood at the altar of St. Patrick's Cathedral, feeling like an actor in a play he hadn't auditioned for. The intimate ceremony, if you could call anything involving 200 guests intimate, was elegant in its simplicity. White roses and soft lighting transformed the ancient space into something that looked suspiciously like a fairy tale. The organ began the wedding march, and Adrian's breath caught. Sophia appeared at the end of the aisle like a vision. Her dress was vintage ivory silk that flowed like water, simple yet breathtaking. Her auburn hair was swept into an elegant updo, with a few soft tendrils framing her face. She carried a small bouquet of white roses. His roses, Adrian realized with a strange jolt. But it was her eyes that stopped his heart. As she walked toward him, her gaze never wavered from his face. There was no joy there, no bridal bliss, but there was something else. A quiet determination that somehow made her more beautiful than any blushing bride. When she reached him, the priest began the ceremony with words about love and devotion that felt like mockery under the circumstances. Adrian found himself studying Sophia's profile as she listened, noting the slight tremor in her hands, the way she worried her bottom lip when nervous. "Do you, Adrian, take Sophia to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Adrian looked into Sophia's green eyes and saw not obligation, but a flicker of something that might have been hope. "I do." "And do you, Sophia, take Adrian to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Her voice was steady, clear. "I do." The kiss was supposed to be perfunctory, a brief touch to seal the deal. But when Adrian's lips met hers, something electric passed between them. Sophia's eyes widened in surprise before fluttering closed, and for a moment that lasted both forever and no time at all. They weren't two strangers fulfilling a contract. They were just a man and woman discovering that sometimes chemistry refuses to follow the rules. When they broke apart, both were breathing slightly harder than the brief contact warranted. The photographer captured the moment, the surprise in both their faces, the way Adrian's hand had somehow moved to cup Sophia's cheek. "Ladies and gentlemen," the priest announced, "I present Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood." The reception at the plaza was a masterpiece of controlled elegance. Adrian watched Sophia navigate the crowd with surprising grace, accepting congratulations and making small talk as if she'd been born to this world. But he noticed the way she touched her wedding ring, a simple platinum band that somehow looked perfect on her slender finger, like she couldn't quite believe it was real. "She's lovely," William said, appearing at Adrian's elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. "She's practical," Adrian corrected, though his eyes never left his new wife as she laughed at something Helena Ashford was saying. Sometimes that's the same thing. During the father-daughter dance, which became the father-in-law dance since Sophia's father had died years ago, Adrian watched William spin her around the floor with surprising gentleness. When the song ended, William said something that made Sophia smile, the first genuine smile Adrian had seen from her all day. "Your turn," William said, depositing Sophia in front of Adrian as the band began a slow waltz. "I should mention I'm not much of a dancer," Adrian said, taking her hand. "Good thing this is just for show then," Sophia replied, but there was a hint of teasing in her voice. They moved together surprisingly well, her hand light in his, her body fitting against his like it belonged there. She smelled like jasmine and promises, and Adrian found himself pulling her slightly closer than strictly necessary. "You're full of surprises," he murmured against her ear. "How so?" "I expected someone more militant, angry. You're handling this better than I am." She tilted her head back to look at him, and he was struck by how young she looked, how vulnerable despite her composure. "What's the alternative? Screaming, crying, running away? None of that changes anything." "You could have run away." "Could you?" The question hung between them as they swayed to the music. Around them, guests watched and whispered, some with approval, others with barely concealed gossip. But in that moment, Adrian was aware only of the woman in his arms and the unsettling realization that maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't be the disaster he'd expected. "I have something for you," he said suddenly, reaching into his jacket pocket. Sophia looked surprised as he pulled out a small velvet box. "Adrian, you don't need to. It's not a gift. It's—" He opened the box, revealing a stunning pair of diamond earrings. Simple, elegant, exactly the kind she might have chosen for herself. "They were my mother's. She died when I was 20. Something shifted in Sophia's expression, surprise melting into something softer. "I can't accept these." "Why not? You're my wife now. Technically, they're already yours." She stared at the earrings for a long moment. "They're beautiful." "She would have liked you," Adrian heard himself say, then wondered where the hell that had come from. "How can you know that?" "Because she believed in doing the right thing, even when it was hard." "She would have understood what you're doing for your family." Tears gathered in Sophia's eyes, though she blinked them back quickly. "Thank you," she whispered, and Adrian knew she wasn't just talking about the earrings. The song ended, but neither of them stepped apart immediately. The moment stretched, fragile and surprisingly intimate, until Helena Ashford appeared with demands for photographs. Later, as guests began to leave and the evening wound down, Adrian found himself genuinely reluctant for it to end, which was insane. This was a business transaction, nothing more. "Ready to go home?" he asked Sophia as she gathered her small purse. She looked up at him, with those impossibly green eyes. "Where exactly is home now?" The question caught him off guard. In all his preparation, he hadn't actually considered the practical details. Where would she live? What would their day-to-day life look like? "The penthouse, I suppose, unless you'd prefer somewhere else." "No, that's fine. I don't have much to move anyway." As they rode the elevator to their penthouse in companionable silence, Adrian snuck glances at his new wife. She'd changed into a simple black dress, but she still wore his mother's earrings and the wedding ring that somehow looked like it belonged there. "Sophia," he said as the elevator approached their floor. "Yes?" "For what it's worth, today wasn't completely terrible." She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her entire face. High praise from Adrian Blackwood. Don't let it go to your head. The elevator doors opened to their new life, uncertain and unplanned, but somehow full of possibilities neither had expected. As they stepped into the penthouse together, Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made the most important deal of his life. He just wasn't sure yet who had gotten the better end of the bargain. The first week of marriage was an exercise in careful choreography. Adrian left for the office at 6 a.m. sharp, returning after 8 p.m. to find Sophia curled up in the library with a book and a cup of tea. They exchanged polite pleasantries. "How was your day?" "Fine, thank you." Like roommates who barely knew each other, which, Adrian reminded himself, was exactly what they were. Except roommates didn't usually make his pulse quicken when they walked into a room wearing nothing but an oversized sweater and leggings, their hair in a messy bun, looking more beautiful than any woman had a right to look while reading about educational psychology. "You're staring," Sophia said without looking up from her book on the following Friday evening. "I'm not staring. I'm observing." That's a very expensive way to say staring. And she marked her page and looked up at him with amusement dancing in her green eyes. "Is there something you need?" "Several things, actually, none of which he could voice without sounding like a complete ass. Like why she hummed softly while making breakfast. Why she arranged fresh flowers in the kitchen every few days, filling the penthouse with life and color it had never had before. Why he'd started coming home earlier just to catch glimpses of her domestic routine. "Marcus mentioned you've been cooking," he said instead. "Is that a problem? I can stop if you prefer." "No." The word came out sharper than intended. "I mean, it's fine. The penthouse is your home too." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe gratitude. "Thank you." An awkward silence stretched between them until Sophia's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and her entire demeanor shifted, brightening like someone had flipped a switch. "Maria, how are the kids?" Her voice was warm, animated in a way Adrian had never heard before. "Oh, that's wonderful news about Tommy's reading scores." "What?" No, I'm fine. Just adjusting to some changes." Adrian pretended to read his tablet while shamelessly eavesdropping. Sophia spoke with the easy affection of someone who genuinely cared, laughing at stories about 8-year-olds and offering advice about parent-teacher conferences with the expertise of someone who'd clearly been doing this for years. "I miss you all too," she said softly, and something in her voice made Adrian's chest tighten. I know. I'll visit soon, I promise." When she hung up, the animation faded from her face, leaving behind a melancholy that hit Adrian like a physical blow. "Friends from work?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "The school where I volunteered. Maria's one of the other teachers." Sophia curled her legs under her, suddenly looking very small in the oversized chair. "They were going to announce my permanent position next week. Full salary, benefits, my own classroom. We're going to. Hard to be a full-time teacher when you're Mrs. Adrian Blackwood, media darling and wife of New York's most formerly eligible bachelor." The bitterness in her voice was so unlike her usual composed demeanor that Adrian felt like he'd been slapped. "You could still teach." "Where? What school wants a teacher whose husband is worth more than their entire district budget? The parents would never see me as anything but the rich lady playing at charity work." Adrian opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. She was probably right. His wealth and prominence would overshadow anything she tried to do professionally. Just like it had overshadowed every relationship he'd ever had. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For what?" "For taking that away from you." Sophia studied him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether his remorse was genuine. "You didn't take anything. We both made choices." "Did we? Or were our choices made for us 15 years ago?" She didn't answer, but something in her expression softened slightly. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the city lights twinkling beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, until Sophia spoke again. "What about you? What did you give up?" Adrian considered lying, giving her some surface-level answer about business deals or social commitments. Instead, he found himself being honest. "Freedom, I suppose. The ability to make decisions based solely on what I wanted rather than what was expected." "You mean Christina?" The name hung between them like a live wire. Adrian hadn't mentioned his former relationship, but of course Sophia would know. The media had been full of speculation about his sudden engagement announcement so soon after his very public relationship with the French model. Among other things, Did you love her? The question was asked so quietly, he almost didn't hear it. Adrian looked at Sophia, really looked, and saw not jealousy or possessiveness, but genuine curiosity. As if she was trying to understand what kind of man she'd married. I thought I did, he said finally. But looking back, I think I loved the idea of her. She was beautiful, sophisticated, uncomplicated. She never challenged me or made me question anything. Sounds peaceful. Boring as hell, actually. Sophia's lips curved in a small smile. Well, I can promise you won't have that problem with me. No, Adrian agreed, his voice rougher than intended. I definitely won't. Their eyes met and held, and suddenly the air between them felt charged with something electric. Adrian found himself leaning forward slightly, drawn by the subtle scent of her perfume and the way the lamplight caught the auburn highlights in her hair. Sophia's breath caught, her lips parting slightly, and for a moment Adrian thought she might be feeling the same inexplicable pull he was. Then his phone rang, shattering the moment like glass. "Blackwood," he answered curtly, not taking his eyes off Sophia. "Adrian, darling." The voice was like ice water down his spine. "Christina. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Sophia's expression immediately shuddered, the warmth disappearing from her eyes as she recognized the voice through the phone's speaker. She stood gracefully, gathering her book. "I should let you take this privately," she said, her voice perfectly polite and completely devoid of the warmth that had been there moments before. "Sophia, wait." But she was already walking toward the stairs, her spine straight and dignified. "Who was that?" Christina's voice purred through the phone. "My wife," Adrian said flatly, watching Sophia disappear up the stairs without a backward glance. "Ah, yes, the little charity case. How quaint." The condescension in Christina's voice made Adrian's jaw clench. "What do you want, Christina? Can't I simply call to congratulate an old friend on his nuptials? Though I must say, the photos from your wedding were lovely. Very domestic." Adrian ended the call without another word, but the damage was done. The fragile connection he'd been building with Sophia had been severed by a ghost from his past, and he had no idea how to repair it. He climbed the stairs to find her bedroom door, a strip of light visible. He stood there, his hand raised to knock. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt. But as he lay in his staring at the ceiling and listening to the Adrian made Christina shallow. Sophia represented something else entirely, something that terrified and intrigued him in equal measure. And for the first time since signing that damn contract, Adrian Blackwood was genuinely curious about what tomorrow might bring, even if it scared the hell out of him. Saturday morning brought an unusual silence to the penthouse. No humming from the kitchen, no soft footsteps padding across the marble floors, no gentle clinking of teacups that had become the soundtrack of Adrian's mornings. He found a note on the kitchen counter in Sophia's careful handwriting. "Gone to visit the school. Back this evening. S." The brevity stung more than it should have. Adrian spent the day in his office, accomplishing nothing productive while his mind replayed the previous evening on an endless loop. The way Sophia's face had closed off when Christina called. The dignity with which she'd excused herself. The quiet click of her bedroom door that had felt like a barrier sliding into place. By evening, he was prowling the penthouse like a caged animal. When he heard her key in the elevator, he positioned himself casually in the living room, pretending to read financial reports. Sophia entered quietly, her cheeks flushed from the October cold, carrying a small canvas bag. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair in a ponytail, and she looked more beautiful than any woman in designer gowns had a right to. "Good evening," she said politely, the same tone she might use with a stranger. "How was your visit?" Adrian asked, setting down his tablet. "Fine." She moved toward the stairs, clearly intending to retreat to her room. "Sophia." The word came out sharper than intended, stopping her mid-step. She turned, one hand on the banister, her expression carefully neutral. "Yes?" "About last night." There's nothing to discuss. Your ex-girlfriend called. You spoke with her. It's none of my business. The formal politeness was somehow worse than anger would have been. It is your business. You're my wife. In name only, she reminded him, and the words hit like a physical blow. As we both agreed. Adrian stood, frustration making his movements sharp. That was before. Before what? Now there was a flash of fire in her green eyes. Before you realized your charity case wife might be acceptable for more than just business purposes? Don't. His voice was low, dangerous. Don't reduce this to that. Then what would you call it? Sophia descended 2 steps, bringing herself closer to his eye level, her composure cracking to reveal the hurt underneath. Because from where I'm standing it looks like you were perfectly content to maintain polite distance until Christina called to remind you what you're missing. Christina has nothing to do with this, doesn't she? Tell me, Adrian. When she called, what did she want? Adrian's jaw clenched. He couldn't lie, not when Sophia was looking at him with those 2 perceptive eyes. She wanted to see me. And nothing. I told her I was married. But you're considering it, aren't you? Seeing her again? The silence stretched too long. In that pause, Adrian saw something die in Sophia's eyes. I thought so, she said quietly. Well, don't let me stop you. After all, this is just a business arrangement. You're free to conduct your personal life however you see fit. She turned to go, but this time Adrian moved faster, catching her wrist as she reached for the banister. You're wrong, he said, his voice rough. About what? About Christina, about this being just business. His thumb traced over the pulse point in her wrist, feeling her heartbeat accelerate. About what I'm considering. Sophia went very still, her eyes searching his face. What are you saying? I'm saying that somewhere between I do and right now, things changed. Adrian stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. I'm saying that when she called last night, all I could think about was how wrong her voice sounded compared to yours. Sophia's breath caught, but she didn't pull away. Adrian, I'm saying that I come home early now because I want to see you reading in the library. That I've started drinking tea because you always have a pot brewing. That I bought tickets to that charity gala next Friday not because it's good for business, but because I want to dance with you again. Her lips parted in surprise. You bought tickets to the Children's Education Foundation gala? You seemed passionate about their cause when you mentioned it last week. For a moment, something soft and wondering crossed her features. Then reality crashed back in, and she pulled her wrist free. You can't do this, she whispered. Do what? Make me hope. Her voice broke slightly on the last word. Make me believe this could be real when we both know it's temporary. When we both know that eventually you'll want your freedom back, and I'll have to figure out how to put my life back together again. Sophia. No. She shook her head, backing away. I won't be your experiment in domestic bliss, Adrian. I won't be the convenient wife who falls conveniently in love with you while you decide whether this arrangement suits you. I've lost enough already. She turned and fled up the stairs, leaving Adrian standing alone in the vast living room, feeling like he'd been kicked in the chest. Later that evening, he stood outside her closed door, listening to the soft sounds of movement within. He raised his hand to knock a dozen times, but couldn't find the words for what he needed to say. Finally, he pressed his palm flat against the wood and spoke quietly, not sure if she could hear him through the door. For what it's worth, he said. It stopped being an experiment the moment you walked into my office. I just didn't have the courage to admit it until now. The sounds inside the room stopped. Adrian waited, hoping she might open the door, might give him a chance to explain properly. But the silence stretched on, and eventually he walked away. What he didn't see was Sophia sitting on the other side of the door, her back against the wood, tears streaming silently down her cheeks as she pressed her hand to the spot where his had been moments before. The next morning brought another note. Gone to visit Helena. Back Wednesday. Need time to think. Adrian crumpled the paper in his fist, then smoothed it out again, tracing the careful loops of her handwriting with his finger. For the first time in his life, Adrian Blackwood, master of corporate negotiations and hostile takeovers, had no idea how to win the deal that mattered most. But he was damn well going to figure it out, because somewhere between their wedding day and this moment, protecting Sophia Ashford had become more important than protecting himself. And if that meant tearing down every wall he'd ever built, learning to be vulnerable with another human being, and risking the kind of heartbreak he'd spent his adult life avoiding, well, some things were worth the risk, even if they scared the hell out of him. 3 days without Sophia felt like 3 years. Adrian threw himself into work with manic intensity, but found himself checking his phone every few minutes for messages that never came. The penthouse felt hollow, stripped of the warmth he hadn't realized she'd brought until it was gone. On Tuesday evening, Marcus found him staring at his laptop screen, the same document open for the past 2 hours. "Perhaps you should call her, sir." She asked for time to think. In my experience, when a woman says she needs time to think, what she actually needs is proof that she's worth fighting for. Adrian looked up from his laptop. "Since when do you give relationship advice?" "Since you've been moping about like a lovesick teenager for 3 days." Marcus set down a cup of tea, the expensive blend Sophia preferred, and Adrian's chest tightened. "If I may be so bold, sir, you've spent your entire adult life acquiring things you wanted. Perhaps it's time to apply those same skills to acquiring someone you need." The words hit like lightning. Adrian closed his laptop with a sharp snap. "Marcus, I need you to make some calls." Wednesday arrived gray and drizzly, matching Adrian's mood perfectly. He'd stationed himself in the living room with a clear view of the elevator, abandoning all pretense of working. When he heard the soft chime at 4:30 p.m., his heart slammed against his ribs. Sophia emerged looking tired but beautiful, her hair slightly damp from the rain. She wore a simple black coat over dark jeans, and the sight of her hit him like a physical blow. "Hi," she said quietly, setting down her small overnight bag. "How is Helena?" "Fine. She sends her regards." Sophia's voice was carefully neutral, but Adrian caught the slight tremor. "How was your week?" "Terrible." The honesty seemed to surprise her. She'd probably expected polite lies, the same social niceties they'd been exchanging for weeks. "Adrian, about the other night." "Before you say anything," he interrupted, standing, "I have something for you." Confusion flickered across her features. "What?" Instead of answering, he walked to the coffee table where he'd placed a manila folder. "This arrived yesterday." Sophia approached cautiously, as if the folder might bite her. When she opened it, her face went completely white. "I don't understand," she whispered, staring at the documents. "It's the deed to the building at 47th and Lexington. The one you mentioned, where you wanted to open your school." Her hands were shaking now. "Adrian, I can't accept this. It's worth millions. Actually, it's worth 3.2 million. I checked." He moved closer, his voice gentle. "There's more." She turned the page, and her breath caught. "A teaching certificate? But this is from the state board, and it's in my married name." Turns out, being married to someone with connections has its advantages. You're now fully certified to teach in New York State, with full endorsements for elementary and special education. Tears were streaming down her face now. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you were wrong the other night. This isn't an experiment, Sophia. This is me trying to give you back what I took away. But the money will be made back in 6 months. Do you know what can't be made back? The look in your eyes when you talked about those kids, the way you lit up when Maria called, the dreams you gave up to marry me." Sophia sank into the nearest chair, the documents scattered on her lap. "I still don't understand." Adrian knelt beside her chair, his heart hammering. "Then let me be clearer. I love you." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Sophia's tears stopped, her green eyes wide with shock. You love me. Desperately. Completely. In a way that terrifies me because I've never felt anything like it before. He reached out tentatively, brushing a tear from her cheek. I love the way you hum while you cook. I love that you put flowers everywhere. I love your strength and your kindness, and the way you make me want to be better than I am. Adrian, I know you don't believe me. I know you think this is some elaborate game, but it's not. You want proof? Christina called 6 times this week. I didn't answer once. She showed up at my office yesterday and I had security escort her out. Sophia's breath caught. You did what? I told her that I was married to the most extraordinary woman in the world, and that I'd rather spend one day earning your trust than a lifetime with someone who bores me. Oh God. Fresh tears spilled over. You can't just say things like that. Why not? It's the truth. Adrian captured her hands in his, feeling the slight tremor in her fingers. Sophia, I know I don't deserve you. I know I'm arrogant and controlling and probably impossible to live with. But I'm asking anyway. Give us a real chance. What if it doesn't work? What if we're too different? Then we'll figure it out, together. But I can't go back to pretending this is just business. Not when you've turned my entire world upside down in 6 weeks. Sophia stared at him for a long moment, searching his face. The school? It would really be mine? Completely. I've already had lawyers draw up the paperwork. The building, the funding, everything. It's yours, no matter what happens between us. No matter what happens. If you want a divorce tomorrow, you keep the school. If you never want to see me again, you keep the school. This isn't a bribe, Sophia. It's an apology. Something cracked in her careful composure. You magnificent, impossible man. Before he could respond, she was kissing him. Not the careful, ceremonial kiss from their wedding, but something desperate and real and hungry. Adrian's arms came around her, pulling her closer, and for the first time in days, he could breathe properly. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Does this mean you'll give us a chance? He asked against her forehead. I'm terrified, she whispered. Good. That makes 2 of us. What if you change your mind? What if you decide you miss your old life? Adrian cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. Sophia Marie Ashford Blackwood, you are my new life. Everything before you was just marking time. The smile that broke across her face was like sunrise after the longest night. I love you too, she whispered. I've been trying so hard not to, but I love you too. This time when they kissed, it felt like coming home. Later, curled up on the couch with Chinese takeout and terrible wine, Sophia traced patterns on Adrian's chest through his shirt. So what happens now? She asked. Now we figure out how to be married for real. Starting with the fact that you're sleeping in the guest room. She looked up at him with raised eyebrows. Presumptuous much. Hopeful, he corrected. Very, very hopeful. Sophia laughed, the sound like music. One step at a time, Mr. Blackwood. I can work with that, Mrs. Blackwood. Outside, New York glittered in the darkness. 8 million people living their lives. But in the penthouse on the 45th floor, 2 people who'd started as strangers bound by contract had discovered something neither had been looking for. They'd found love. Real, complicated, terrifying, wonderful love. And for the first time in his life, Adrian Blackwood was exactly where he belonged. 2 weeks of blissful domesticity shattered on a Thursday morning when Sophia opened the New York Post over breakfast and went deathly pale. Adrian. Her voice was barely a whisper. He looked up from his tablet, immediately alarmed by her tone. What is it? Without a word, she turned the newspaper toward him. The headline screamed in bold letters. Blackwood's billion-dollar bride, the truth behind Manhattan's most mysterious marriage. Below it was a photo of them dancing at their wedding, looking genuinely happy. But the subheading made Adrian's blood run cold. Exclusive, Family friend reveals arranged marriage contract. Financial desperation behind society wedding. Shit. Adrian grabbed the paper, scanning the article with growing horror. Every detail was there. The original loan, the marriage clause, the $1.8 billion debt. Even quotes from an unnamed close family friend describing Sophia as a convenient solution to an embarrassing financial problem. They make me sound like a... Sophia's voice cracked. Like I was purchased. Sophia, no one who matters will believe... His phone erupted with calls, then hers. The penthouse intercom buzzed with requests from reporters downstairs. Outside, they could see news vans gathering like vultures. How? Sophia whispered, staring at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. How did they find out? Adrian's jaw clenched as he read deeper into the article. Only a handful of people knew the complete truth. His father, Helena, and Christina, he said, the name like poison on his tongue. What? The quotes, the inside information. It has to be Christina. She's the only one outside the family who knew enough details. Sophia's face went white. Your ex-girlfriend sold our story to the tabloids? Before Adrian could respond, his phone rang. William's name flashed on the screen. Dad, have you seen? I'm looking at it now. Adrian, this is a disaster. The board is in emergency session. Our stock is down 12% in pre-market trading. The investors are panicking. I'll handle it. How? The entire business world now knows our marriage is a sham. The word sham hit Sophia like a physical blow. She stood abruptly, walking to the window with her arms wrapped around herself. It's not a sham, Adrian said quietly, watching his wife's rigid posture. The contract says otherwise, and now everyone knows it. Adrian ended the call and moved to Sophia, placing gentle hands on her shoulders. She was trembling. Hey, he said softly. Look at me. When she turned, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. They're calling me a gold digger, a manipulative opportunist who trapped you into marriage for money. Anyone who knows you, nobody knows me! The words exploded out of her. That's the problem. To the world, I'm nobody. Just some teacher who somehow convinced Adrian Blackwood to marry her. And now they think they know why. Adrian's hands tightened on her shoulders. I don't care what they think. Well, I do. She pulled away from him, pacing to the other side of the room. I care that everyone will look at me and see a transaction. I care that your business partners will never respect me. I care that every charity event, every social function, every moment of our lives will be overshadowed by this. Sophia. And the worst part? Her voice broke completely. The worst part is they're not entirely wrong. Our marriage did start as a business arrangement. We did get married because of money. That's not why we're married now, isn't it? She turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. How do we know? How do we know what's real and what's just convenient? How do we know we didn't just convince ourselves we're in love because it makes this whole situation more palatable? The words hit Adrian like a sledgehammer to the chest. You don't mean that, don't I? 2 months ago, we were strangers. Now we're supposed to be madly in love? Maybe the newspapers are right. Maybe we're just two people who made the best of an impossible situation. Stop. Adrian's voice was sharp, commanding. Stop letting them poison what we have. What we have was built on a lie. No, he said fiercely, crossing the room to her. What we have was built on honesty, on choosing each other every day despite how we started, on finding something real in the middle of something artificial. Sophia shook her head, backing away. I need air. I need to think. Where are you going? I don't know. Anywhere but here. She grabbed her coat and purse, heading for the elevator. Adrian followed. Sophia, don't run. We can get through this. The elevator doors opened and she stepped inside, turning to face him with devastation written across her features. Can we? Because right now it feels like everyone else can see something we've been too blind to admit. Maybe we've been playing house, Adrian. Maybe we've been so desperate to make this work that we convinced ourselves it was love. You know that's not true. Do I? The elevator doors began to close. Right now, I don't know anything anymore. Adrian watched the numbers descend, each floor taking her further away from him. He pressed his palms against the closed doors, feeling more helpless than he ever had in his life. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. How does it feel to have your perfect world exposed? Some people deserve to know what real loss feels like. See, Christina. This was her revenge for his rejection, her way of destroying what she couldn't have. She'd weaponized their love story, turned it into tabloid fodder, and in the process, she might have destroyed the most important thing in his life. Adrian stared at the message, white-hot rage building in his chest. But beneath the anger was something worse, fear. Fear that Christina had succeeded in planting enough doubt to drive Sophia away permanently. Because the terrible truth was that Sophia had a point. They had fallen in love fast, under extraordinary circumstances. What if it was just elaborate self-deception? What if they'd simply convinced themselves that necessity was destiny? Hours passed with no word from Sophia. Adrian's calls went straight to voicemail. His texts went unanswered. By evening, he was pacing the penthouse like a caged animal, imagining every possible scenario, most of them ending with her walking away forever. At midnight, the elevator chimed. Adrian spun around, hope and terror warring in his chest. Sophia stepped out, looking exhausted but determined. She'd been crying. He could see the tracks on her cheeks. But her green eyes were clear. "I've been thinking," she said quietly. And I realized something. She moved closer, never taking her eyes off his face. "I don't care how we started. I don't care what the papers say. I don't care if the whole world thinks our marriage is fake." Adrian's heart stopped. "Sophia, because I know what's real." She reached up to cup his face in her hands. "This is real. What I feel for you is real. And I'm not going to let anyone, not Christina, not the media, not even my own doubts, take that away from us." Relief flooded through him so powerfully he nearly staggered. "Are you sure?" "I love you, Adrian Blackwood. Not because of a contract, not because it's convenient, but because you're the most maddening, wonderful, impossible man I've ever met. And if the world wants to think I'm a gold digger, let them. They'll learn the truth eventually." Adrian pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I love you too. More than I thought possible." They stood there in the middle of their living room, holding each other against the storm of public opinion and private doubt. And Adrian knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next, they'd face it together. The newspapers could print whatever they wanted. The world could judge them. But what he and Sophia had built together was stronger than scandal, deeper than doubt, and more real than any contract ever written. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, they had each other. And sometimes, that was enough to weather any storm. 6 months later, the Children's Education Foundation Gala was in full swing at the Plaza Hotel. Adrian adjusted his cufflinks for the third time, scanning the crowd for any sign of trouble. Despite Sophia's brave words that night, the scandal had taken its toll. Invitations had dried up. Business relationships had cooled. Some of New York's elite still whispered when they passed. But tonight was different. Tonight, they were fighting back. "You're fidgeting," Sophia said, appearing at his side in a stunning emerald gown that made her eyes look like jewels. 6 months of marriage had only made her more beautiful. Confidence had replaced uncertainty, and happiness had softened the sharp edges of stress. "I'm not fidgeting. I'm strategically assessing." She laughed, the sound that had become his favorite music. "Relax, the speech will go perfectly." "What if no one listens? What if they're all here just to watch us crash and burn?" Sophia turned to face him fully, straightening his already perfect tie. "Then we'll burn spectacularly and rebuild from the ashes. We've done it before." Before Adrian could respond, Helena Ashford approached with a satisfied smile. "Are you ready for this?" As ready as we'll ever be, Sophia replied, squeezing Adrian's hand. Good, because half the city's power players are here, and they're all watching. Helena's eyes gleamed with something that looked suspiciously like pride. Time to remind them why they should never underestimate an Ashford, or a Blackwood. The master of ceremonies took the stage, his voice booming across the ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founders of the Sophia Blackwood Foundation for Educational Excellence, Mr. and Mrs. Adrian Blackwood. Applause rippled through the crowd, some genuine, some polite, some clearly skeptical. Adrian felt Sophia's hand tremble slightly in his as they walked to the podium together. Thank you, Sophia began, her voice clear and strong despite the sea of judgmental faces. 6 months ago, many of you read some very unflattering things about my husband and me in the newspapers. A murmur went through the crowd. This wasn't the gracious deflection they'd expected. You read that our marriage was arranged, that it was based on money rather than love, that I was, in essence, purchased like a business asset. Adrian watched the room, noting the uncomfortable shifts, the exchanged glances. Sophia had insisted on this approach, complete honesty rather than damage control. And you know what? Sophia continued, her voice gaining strength. Some of that was true. The room went dead silent. Our marriage did begin as a contract. We were strangers who agreed to marry for financial reasons. But what the newspapers didn't print, what they couldn't understand, is that sometimes the best love stories begin in the most unlikely places. She turned slightly toward Adrian, her smile radiant. They didn't print how my husband spent weeks learning to cook my favorite breakfast, how he reads to children at the school he bought me. Yes, bought me, because he saw it was my dream. They didn't mention how he holds my hand during thunderstorms because he noticed I get scared. Adrian felt his throat tighten. In the audience, he could see faces softening, the hostility beginning to shift to curiosity. 6 months ago, I thought love was something that happened to other people, something beautiful and rare that I might never experience. Sophia's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. I was wrong. Love isn't always a lightning strike. Sometimes it's a sunrise, slow and gentle, and so gradual you don't realize it's happening until suddenly your whole world is bright. She gestured to Adrian, who stepped forward to join her at the microphone. The newspapers called our marriage a sham, he said, his voice steady despite the emotional storm brewing inside him. They were wrong. What we have is real, but even if it weren't. He paused, looking directly at Christina, who sat frozen at a corner table. Even if it weren't, would that make the good we've done together any less meaningful? Behind them, a presentation screen lit up with images. The Sophia Blackwood Foundation's new school, children learning in bright classrooms, teachers receiving equipment and training. In 6 months, Adrian continued, this foundation has opened 3 schools in underserved communities. We've provided education for over 800 children who previously had limited access to quality learning. We've created 150 jobs for teachers, administrators, and support staff. The images shifted to show financial charts, testimonials from parents, standardized test scores showing remarkable improvement. Those children don't care how our marriage began, Sophia said, retaking the microphone. They care that they're learning to read. Their parents don't care about our contract. They care that their kids have hope for the future. The room was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Tonight, Adrian said, we're asking you to join us in expanding this work, not because you approve of how we met, but because you believe every child deserves a chance at education. Sophia smiled at the crowd, no longer the nervous woman who'd fled their penthouse 6 months ago, but a confident leader ready to change the world. The newspapers got one thing right, she said. This marriage has been very good for business, the business of making a difference. The applause started slowly, then built to a thunderous ovation. Adrian watched, amazed, as the same people who'd been whispering about them 6 months ago rose to their feet. Later, as they mingled with guests, Adrian overheard conversations that made his chest swell with pride. That school program is remarkable. Did you see those test scores? I had no idea they were doing such important work. She's nothing like what the papers made her sound. Margaret Whitmore, the city's most influential socialite and former friend of Christina's, approached with a checkbook in her hand. "Mrs. Blackwood," she said formally, "I owe you an apology. And the foundation a donation." She handed Sophia a check that made her eyes widen. For the new Brooklyn location. As Margaret walked away, Sophia turned to Adrian with tears in her eyes. "Did we just win them over completely?" "Yeah, I think we did." Across the room, Adrian spotted Christina leaving through a side exit, her face flushed with what looked like embarrassment. Their eyes met briefly, and he saw something that might have been regret before she disappeared into the crowd. "No looking back," Sophia said, following his gaze. "Never," he agreed, pulling her closer. The evening ended with pledges totaling over $12 million for the foundation's expansion. But more importantly, it ended with acceptance, genuine respect for what they'd built together. On the ride home, Sophia curled against Adrian's side in the back of their car, both of them exhausted but exhilarated. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if our fathers hadn't made that deal?" she asked quietly. Adrian considered the question seriously. "Honestly, I think I would have spent years being miserable with the wrong women, wondering why nothing felt right. And I would have been too busy saving the world to notice I was forgetting to save room for love in my own life." "So you're saying we needed that ridiculous contract?" Sophia laughed, the sound soft in the dim car. "I'm saying maybe sometimes destiny uses whatever tools it has available, even antique business agreements. Are you suggesting we were meant to be together?" She shifted to look up at him, her green eyes sparkling. "I'm suggesting that I can't imagine my life without you anymore. Contract or no contract." Adrian kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. "Good thing you don't have to." As their car pulled up to Blackwood Tower, Adrian realized that the building no longer felt like just his home. It was their home. Just like the foundation wasn't just Sophia's project, it was their shared mission. Just like their marriage was no longer a contract between strangers, but a partnership between soulmates. "Mrs. Blackwood?" he said as they stepped out of the elevator into their penthouse. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood. I have something for you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Sophia's eyes widened. "Adrian, what? It's not what you think." He opened the box to reveal not a ring, but a key. "It's the key to the house in Connecticut." "What house in Connecticut?" "The one I bought us. 4 bedrooms, big backyard, perfect for when we start filling those bedrooms with little Blackwoods, who'll probably be as stubborn as their mother and as impossible as their father." Tears spilled over her cheeks. "You bought us a house. I bought us a future, one that has nothing to do with contracts or obligations or what other people think we should be." He cupped her face in his hands. "I bought us a place where we can just be Adrian and Sophia, completely in love and slightly ridiculous about it." Sophia kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, she was smiling through her tears. "I love you, Adrian Blackwood. Not because I have to, not because it's convenient, but because you're mine and I'm yours, and somehow we found each other despite every odd against us. I love you too, Sophia Blackwood. More than any contract could ever guarantee." Outside their windows, New York sparkled in the darkness. 8 million people living their lives, chasing their dreams, searching for their own unlikely love stories. And in the penthouse that had once been a symbol of isolation and control, 2 people who'd started as strangers bound by obligation had created something beautiful and real and lasting. They'd found love. Not the easy kind that comes with fairy tale beginnings, but the hard-won kind that comes from choosing each other every day, from building something together stronger than the forces trying to tear it apart. The contract that had brought them together was just paper now, filed away and forgotten. What they had built together was forever. And that, Adrian thought as he carried his wife to their bedroom, was the best deal he'd ever made.